Welcome to episode 93 of the Meet Mafia podcast. On today's episode, we had on Econoalchemist, or as we call him, Econo. We had the pleasure of meeting Econo out in Crawford, Colorado at Jason Rick's ranch earlier in July at the Beef Initiative event, where we spoke about Bitcoin and beef. And Econo brought up an amazing story about a rancher named Vern Wagner who lives in Colorado and essentially for over a decade had litigation and financial problems relating to the state being authoritative and essentially trying to shut down his business. And it was an incredible story. It touched everyone in the room and spoke to a major problem, which is this authoritarian state putting pressure on people in ways that they shouldn't have the power to do so. And Econo essentially makes the case for why Bitcoin is a tool to protect people against that. Without further ado, Econoalchemist. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Equip Foods. Equip provides a complete source of grass-fed beef protein with no added chemicals, fillers, binding agents, or artificial coloring or sweeteners. If you're familiar with the supplement industry, you know that most supplements are loaded with ingredients that you can't even pronounce. Equip's Unflavored Prime has one single ingredient derived directly from grass-fed beef protein. For purists like ourselves who try to only consume balanced, real sources of nutrition, this protein powder checks all the boxes. Go check them out in the link below and use our promo code in the description to get a discount. We get questions all the time about how to incorporate beef liver into a healthy, balanced diet. The questions are usually around how to source high-quality beef liver, how to overcome the taste of liver, and how to travel and still be able to include beef liver into your diet. That's why we love Optimal Carnivore, which provides beef liver supplements as well as an organ complex for people to incorporate beef liver without the taste and with the convenience of just being able to pack it into a bag and toss it into your mouth when you're ready for your supplements. Beef liver is an important part of my diet because it provides me with the B12, copper, vitamin A that you can't really get from any other food groups. Beef liver is truly nature's vitamin, and being able to incorporate it in such an easy form, such as this supplement, makes it that much better. Go check out Optimal Carnivore and let us know what you think. Econo, what is going on? Welcome to the Meat Mafia podcast, man. Good to see you again.
Thanks for having me here, guys. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you virtually. And we were saying before we hit record, we got the opportunity to meet at the Beef Initiative conference out in Crawford, Colorado. And we were lucky because the three of us were both speakers at that event. And so as such, we had slim secured campgrounds for us. So you and your family were staying right next to us, which was pretty hysterical. But we really enjoyed the presentation that you had done, the Why Bitcoin presentation, and you had done an amazing job tying that back into the ranching community. You told a particularly really powerful story about your buddy Vern, who's a rancher out in Colorado. So I think to kick it off, man, we would love to learn just a little bit more about you, your background, how you got into Bitcoin. And I think we would love to get into that story to tell the people a little bit about Vern. That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I'm just a regular guy. I'm not an expert. I'm not like a computer scientist. I don't have an advanced degree in coding or, I don't know how to write code or anything like that. I'm just a regular dude who's been trying to navigate the crazy world that we live in, right? And in December of 2018, I stumbled upon Bitcoin through a family friend. He's been a friend of mine. He's my brother-in-law, and we were talking at a holiday party, and we started talking about Bitcoin. And when I first started learning about it, and my approach to it was more of like a stock, I was thinking, okay, here's an opportunity for me to take a little bit of money, invest it, and try and turn it into some more money so I can use that to provide better for my family. And it took me a while to realize, I started getting into Andreas Antonopoulos videos, and then I bought his books, and then I couldn't sleep for 2 weeks. I stopped eating. I just got completely obsessed with what Bitcoin was and trying to figure out what this new technology was. And the more I learned about it, the more I realized that it was actually a tool that could solve real world problems and real world problems that I had faced personally. And, I've struggled with money all my life. I've been working 40 hours a week since I was 15 years old, all through high school, all through my bachelor program, all through my master's program. I was just going full steam, dude, just running my engine as hard as I could, trying to keep up with the rat race. And my friends, my family, all the people around me were struggling with money. And it's just like, it's just hard out there for people.
Mm-hmm.
And I read William Cooper's Behold a Pale Horse at the age of 17. And that really like influenced my perception of the Federal Reserve and the monetary system. But I didn't know what I could do about it. I was just angry about it. And I just knew it was, can I cuss on this podcast?
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
I just knew like the system was fucked, and I could see all the people around me getting fucked, and like everything was fucked and I was fucked. And like, dude, I didn't know what to do. And then so in 2018, when I found Bitcoin and started getting into it, I'm like, dude, this is like the answer that I've been looking for. Like, no longer is my paycheck going to get garnished, and so anyone who's been living paycheck to paycheck and spending 125% of their income leaning on their credit card, and then you go and get garnishment implemented by the state, and they're taking an extra 15% out of that. Like, try paying your mortgage when that's going on.
Right.
So people who've been in that kind of situation, they really appreciate censorship resistance. They know what that means. Those aren't just buzzwords to them. People who go out and try and open a bank account who've been rejected by bank after bank after bank because they're trying to do something in the cryptocurrency space, because they're a sex worker, because they're in the marijuana business, even though it's legal in their state, it's just illegal at the federal level. They can't get access to basic financial services. They get cut off from the world around them. They can't interact economically with their peers. So then if you've ever been in a situation like that, or someone who has, then you really appreciate peer-to-peer transactions. You really appreciate permissionless money. Those buzzwords actually have real actionable meaning for you at that point. And so that's kind of like when I transitioned from thinking about Bitcoin like it was a stock to thinking of it like it was a tool, right? But then it was still like a whole nother evolution for me to make that leap from that point to understanding the dangers of KYC and the importance of self-custody. And then once that started setting in, then I started becoming pretty set in my, who I am today. And so yeah, that's how I got into it. And then, I was just so obsessed with it that I just wanted to write about it. And I'm very meticulous and thorough. So I write these like step-by-step guides that I was just trying to show other people what I was doing and how I was using this stuff. And it just kind of started catching on, and I got more and more of a following. And then some, companies in the space like Bitcoin Magazine, Upstream Data, the Brains team, they saw what I was doing. They liked the content that I was putting out, and they saw the following that I had. And, I never wanted to submit my viewers to things that I personally don't like, such as paywalls or advertisements.
Right.
And so like my content it's always going to be free on my blog. I'm never going to rent out advertising space. I fucking hate YouTube because of the censorship that they wield. And so like, I don't use those traditional platforms or those tactics to try and monetize my content. It's because those companies recognized what I was doing, and those companies recognized the following that I had, that they wanted to support me. And then through their support, now their names are getting attached to the content that I'm putting out and being distributed to my audience. And then that's how I've been making my living.
Wow.
By putting this content out there.
Where did you start to find traction? Because one of the things I was really impressed with you in Colorado was just your ability to speak to this tool, as you described, in a very plain and simple way. But when people start talking about Bitcoin, right, you're not alone in your obsession over it. And it's so exciting and fun to talk about with other people who are as excited about it. But when you're talking to someone who doesn't know as much about Bitcoin or know like the prospects of what Bitcoin offers, they start to get glossy-eyed, or they start to get like a little whoa, man, relax. Like this is this is magic internet money. What are you talking about? So I'm curious, like, where did you find your groove and start to find traction with educating people on this stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I really try to focus on like actionable steps that people can take to use this thing to better their situation, you know, and that's why like everybody's got money problems, right? Like
Yeah.
anyone you talk to can relate to that. So that's a good place to start. But then, you know, for me, like speaking from my own experience, and this was the challenge I was facing going into the Colorado Beef Initiative. You know, Slim asked me, he's like, "Hey, Econo, will you do this presentation and explain to this audience of ranchers and farmers why they need Bitcoin or why they might be interested in it?" And so I accepted, and then I really started thinking like, dude, how am I going to relate to these people, you know? And so that's what I try and do is like I try to explain Bitcoin in a way that people can relate to so that they recognize events that have occurred in their life that align with the solutions that Bitcoin offers, right? And so that's why I often talk about like having my wages garnished, because there's a lot of people out there who have experienced that. So if you've experienced that, then you know what the importance of censorship resistance. And then we've got some common ground, right? And then I can kind of explain how you use Bitcoin in a censorship resistant way. Or if you've ever had problems opening a bank account, that's why I talk about that one a lot too, because when I first got started in this, I was trying to start a Bitcoin ATM business. You know, we sold our house outside of Denver and we moved up to Cheyenne, Wyoming, because we listened to Caitlin Long and Tyler Lindholm and Jared Olson talk about all the laws they were passing in Wyoming. So we went up there to start a Bitcoin ATM business. But dude, we got rejected by 12 banks just in Cheyenne. And then there were another 5 banks on top of that in California, New York, and Colorado. Nobody would work with us. We couldn't get access to banking services. So here we are. We made this major life-altering move without consulting an attorney first, and sold our house and bought another house in another state. And then lo and behold, we couldn't interact economically with the world around us. And that was a major problem trying to start a business. So anyone who's, you know, had trouble like that, you know, they understand what permissionless means then, you know, and then you've got some more common ground, right? But then like, you know, I just don't buy into this like number go up technology meme, right? Like you find a lot of people trying to rope people in with like these dollar signs.
Right.
And it's like, dude, buy Bitcoin now. It's going to go to fucking $100,000, man. You'll be rich. And it's like, look, if you want to use Bitcoin as a conduit to accumulate more fiat money, like more power to you, right? Like you can do whatever you want with this stuff.
Right.
But you don't need Bitcoin to do that. You can stay in that walled garden. You can just use GBTC, or you can just use PayPal, or you could, you know, any of these other things. You don't need Bitcoin to do that, right? So like, ask yourself, like, I encourage people to ask themselves, like, what are you really here for? Like, what are your problems that you're trying to solve for? And if I can understand your problem, then I can usually find a nexus to Bitcoin and explain how this might help alleviate that problem. And that was kind of like the crossroad I found thinking about ranchers. You know, I was like, dude, I don't have any common ground here. Like, how am I going to tell a rancher, like, you need censorship resistant money? And so I started thinking about it, and I'm just reflecting, and it dawned on me. I'm like, dude, I did meet a cattle rancher once, and me and my buddy got a truck stuck in a ditch on his ranch and like almost froze to death. And then the next morning he went and pulled us out of the ditch. And that's when I met Vern Wagner. And he took us back to his house, and his wife made us breakfast, and he started telling me his story. And it all started coming back to me. You got to understand, this was like 10 years ago, right? This was in 2012. And so it just, when I started thinking about ranchers, it all started coming back to me. I'm like, dude, he had a really fucked up story. Like he was telling me about how like undercover PETA activists were working as ranch hands under him, and how the state came in and confiscated his cattle and like auctioned his cattle off to pay for the investigation on him, and like all this stuff. And I'm remembering all these bits and pieces of the story. And so I go back to research it online, and everything is pointing back to this newspaper from his area. He's in Hartselle, Colorado. And the local newspaper there is called the Flume. And so everything I'm finding is pointing back to the Flume. And I'm trying to like get all these details so I can, talk about how important it is to have property that can't be confiscated, right?
Mm.
Because that was going to be my nexus. Like here's this story of this dude who was having everything taken from him by the full weight of the violence of the state. And I'm like, Bitcoin is something that no one can confiscate from you if you're doing self-custody, right? So I'm like, this is my nexus. And I start digging in and I find the Flume, and I'm just like, I'm hitting a paywall. So somebody, some hero out there, used Bitcoin to buy an anonymous online debit card, and they used that to get through the paywall. And then they found all like 130 articles related to Vern Wagner, and they submitted them to the Internet Archives and archived every single one of those articles.
Wow.
And I just happened to stumble upon this archive of articles while I was trying to find information about Vern. And then, so I took all of those archives and made them available on my website now. So now I've got everything laid out chronologically about Vern's story. And then I was able to like structure the timeline and like fill in all the blanks and then bring that to the Beef Initiative and give that presentation that I gave.
Wow. So if someone wants to access those 130 articles that you mentioned, they can just go directly to your website.
Yep. Yeah, I've got them. It's on econoalchemist.github.io
Mm-hmm.
/ this URL got ridiculous, but just go
We'll
to
link to we'll link to it, Echo. So
okay.
Yeah.
I'll
So
send you the link.
perfect. My question for you was, because you mentioned that Vern helped save you and your buddy. You were stuck out on his property and you were talking with him in his kitchen, starting to learn more about his story. Did you realize how insane this entire experience was, or did the articles really show you a new perspective that existed?
Yeah, no, it like what I recalled him telling me was just like, I remember it being like really fucked up, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know the extent of it until I started finding all these archives and going through all this stuff and filling in all of those blanks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like, 10 years ago, I only remember a few things that Vern was telling me, but it left an impact. I knew it was fucked. And when I started going through all these articles, man, it's just like this dude just withstood blow after blow after blow from the state, and just some of the most like corrupt local officials you could imagine. It's just, and it goes on for years, dude. The time span, I'm looking at it now, it's like the articles span from July of 2003 all the way until May of 2018. So like for
Wow.
years, this dude was just under siege from the state, like trying to ranch, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would it's so ironic that he was in Colorado too. And that's where you gave the presentation on how Bitcoin is relevant to these ranchers. And I'm curious what your take would be. So like, what should he or could he have done if he had Bitcoin in his power when the state was kind of coming for all of his assets and his business, essentially his livelihood?
Yeah. And this is an important point to make, and something I tried to make clear at the conference. It's like Bitcoin's a tool, right? And a lot of people will tell you that like Bitcoin fixes everything. Right.
Right.
And I think it's important for people to understand it's just a tool, and like tools just help you, but you can't survive entirely off of one tool, right?
Right.
Like, it takes a lot of things. And so Bitcoin would have helped Vern, certainly. It wouldn't have stopped all the stuff that happened to Vern, right? So what Bitcoin could have done is it could have given him a cushion that the banks didn't have access to. It could have enabled him to still have access to basic financial services. And, I should clarify that like technically Bitcoin couldn't have done anything to him because a lot of this stuff happened before Bitcoin even existed.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But I'm just saying, like, if someone were in a similar situation as Vern today, Bitcoin could help that person, right?
Right.
So some of the things that were happening with Vern is like, so he's getting involved with all of these lawsuits, and then the banks are, and now he's got like former business partners that are like countersuing him in these lawsuits. And so he's got like physical property on his ranch. So he's got like ranching equipment, tractors and stuff, and then he's got his cattle. And the state is coming in, they're sending in sheriffs and like confiscating this stuff from him. So like Bitcoin isn't going to do anything about that, right? We're talking about like physical assets that a sheriff can come in and physically get their hands on. There's not much you can do about that. But when that happens, at the same time as the bank locking you out of your accounts and freezing all of your funds because now you're wrapped up in this lawsuit with your business partners, well, now you don't have your cushion, but your mortgage payments still due, your electric bills still due, you still got all these bills that are due. So how are you going to like pay for things, right? And so this is where Bitcoin could have helped him. It could have helped giving him some cushion, giving him a little bit of monetary value that could not have been confiscated, that he could not have been locked out of, that he could have still used to sell for cash, get money for it somehow, get money into someone else's account that can make the payments on his behalf. He can figure out clever ways to use that stored value, that unconfiscatable value, to transact and get money for it that he can use to pay. Ideally you would just be able to spend the Bitcoin directly for things, but the way it is right now, most people have to like sell their Bitcoin for cash in one manner or another, and then use that to go pay their electric bill or their mortgage or whatever.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Echo, for someone that isn't familiar with Vern's story, at the Beef Initiative conference, you gave this unbelievable, I think it was a 30-minute session just on Vern's story alone. And people, we were legitimately speechless because you go into such vivid detail of just step by step by step, the way that the state literally broke this guy's back, and one corrupt government official in particular. But for someone that's not familiar, is there a way to kind of give like a condensed Cliff Notes version of that story for Vern?
Yeah, definitely. So, and just for the listeners, like go navigate over to econoalchemist.github.io and look for the Sovereign Rancher. And in there, you're going to find all of these articles. And I'm going to skip over a lot of it here, but basically this all started when Vern moved to Hartzell in like 2003 or the year 2000. This started, I think he moved there in 2000, and 2003 is when this all started getting kicked up. But basically the dude comes from a long lineage of ranchers, and he knew how to ranch. He knew how to do cattle ranching, and he quickly expanded his operation when he moved to Hartzell to like 130,000 acres. Right. Wow. So just this, like, he basically, if anyone's familiar with Colorado, he basically owned everything from the junction of Highway 9 and 285 all the way down that whole triangle to where Highway 24 crosses 285 and Highway 9, which is just a massive area. Okay. So he's got BLM leases, he's got private leases, he's got 130,000 acres, he's got like 2,000 head of cattle. Well, he got into a dispute with one of the people that he was in a lease agreement with. And these people told him he was going to get 50,000 acres for what he was paying for. Well, it turned out he actually only had access to like 8,000 acres. And that's how this dispute started, because the other company that owned the rest of that acreage, they actually wanted to turn it into like a housing development. And they had all these bison that they wanted to graze on that land. And they didn't want Vern and his cattle on that land. So that's what kicked this whole thing off, right? So one of the buddies of this development company was an attorney for Park County, which Hartzell is located in. And this attorney created this ordinance that made it so that if your cattle were caught grazing on someone else's property, you would get a criminal misdemeanor. And for some people that might sound logical, but for anyone who's familiar with the laws in the state of Colorado, Colorado is what's called a fence out state. If you do not want cattle on your property, it's up to you to fence them out of your property. Okay. So if you don't put up that fence and cattle come onto your property, that's on you. That's not on the cattle rancher. And so that's where this started taking a turn for the worse. And the ordinance that this guy created was in direct violation of state law, and it explicitly excluded bison from the ordinance. And so that just gives you an idea how sleazy these guys are. So as the years go on and the legal battles keep raging on, this attorney for Park County becomes the deputy district attorney, and he starts getting more power. And then eventually he actually becomes a judge in Park County. And the whole time this judge he's got this bloodthirst for Vern Wagner, and he's got this grudge that hasn't been settled. And this just goes on for years. And so this judge starts using his power to get the Department of Agricultural, like the veterinarians for the Department of Agriculture, to go out there and over exaggerate the state of Vern's cattle. And so one particular winter was like the second harshest winter on record in Park County. And then these veterinarians went out there right after that winter and said that a bunch of cattle were looking sick and that they found dead cattle. And, even Vern will admit that like about 100 cattle did die that winter. But for anyone who's familiar with ranching, when you're talking about 100 dead cattle in a herd that's like 2,000 head of cattle large, that's not a shocking loss, especially with the winter that harsh. So these veterinarians like start over exaggerating things and making things up, and the lawsuits continue. And so they end up pressing criminal charges on him. He had, like I mentioned, he had undercover PETA agents working for him as ranch hands that were like feeding misinformation to these veterinarians. And so with those criminal charges, then the state was able to like put these court orders on him and make it so that he couldn't even touch his own cattle on his own land, nor could he interfere with any state agents that were going onto his land. And then that's when the sheriffs started coming out there and confiscating his cattle, and there's nothing he can do about it. And then one of the officials in the state like put in this request because they had spent so much money on their investigation of Vern. He put in this request with the judge, and the judge allowed it without even having a trial to confiscate the cattle and then sell them at auction, so the state could raise money to pay for the investigation that they launched against Vern even before he was convicted of anything. So like, imagine you haven't even been found guilty. Like, where's you're not being presumed to be innocent, And so, dude, and this story it just goes from like unbelievable to just like you're just totally speechless by the end. And I think that's kind of, what you're saying you experienced at the conference.
It doesn't even seem real the way that you told it too. What was the total time frame from start to finish?
So this went on from 2003. That's when the first article on Vern is published in the Flume. And that goes all the way up till May of 2018 is like the last article I found on him. And so this just went on for like 15 years.
It's insane to think that he even had the energy to continue to keep fighting. But then you kind of contrast that to some of the stuff and some of the things that you hear today too around personal property rights, and a lot of it around like people who are owning land. You hear things like in the Netherlands and Holland, the farmers there are now getting encroached by authorities about nitrogen pollution, and if you don't meet certain parameters, then you have to kind of shut down your business. Similar things are happening in Pennsylvania with I think it's Amos Miller. So these aren't just one-off examples. They happen, right? And I think your perspective on it is really unique when you can tell the story, but also relate it to why personal property at the most advanced level, the tool that you're talking about in Bitcoin, actually can help you kind of facilitate like at least giving yourself some room to wiggle when you're getting pressed down that firmly against, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, Amos Miller is a good example. The Dutch farmers are a great example. Dude, when you start feeling the full weight of the state's violence come down on you, you think you're absolutely alone and that
Mm.
there's nowhere to turn and there's nothing to do, especially if you're having your assets frozen and you're watching your property walk right away from you because of somebody wearing a badge. These people aren't alone though, dude. This is happening all around the country. This is happening all around the world. The state has the monopoly on violence, and this is the kind of shit that they do. It is a battle of attrition, is what this is. And that's how the state grinds people down. Like Vern fought this for 15 years and just kept it together, man. He faced hell and just kept it. His wife even suffered a heart attack after right there at the courthouse, right after one of the trials was concluded. And I mean, she survived, but she, suffered, and the stress will just kill a person. A lot of people think like if they're going to like go into this battle with the state, they think it's going to be like some Waco event where there's like all these shots being fired and mortars going off. Like, dude, that's 9 times out of 10, not how your battle against the state is going to look. It's
Right.
going to look like you getting cut off from your basic financial services. It's going to look like you having your assets frozen. It's going to look like really long, drawn out battles where you're just getting bled out, and financially speaking, because you're trying to pay for attorneys and you're trying to secure your property and you're trying to fight for your rights. And that's what the battle against the state is going to look like. And that's what so many people are up against. And by telling stories like this and telling Amos Miller's story and telling the Dutch farmer's story and getting the word out there, more people see it. And then they say, hey, that happened to me too. I've got a story like that. And then more people speak up. And it just,
Mhm.
I hope that this turns into like a whole movement of people standing up and waking up and realizing what the state is doing and the violence that happens against people and the way that it happens,
Mhm.
and I want people to get out of this like Hollywood perception of like they're gonna like go into some gunfight like it's Waco. Like that's not how you're gonna fight the state. I hate to break it to you, but it's probably going to be in the courtroom. So you
Yeah.
need to get ready for like a really long haul, and you need to think about like what kind of life vest are you going to have when you're drowning in financial fines, and you don't have access to your savings, you don't have access to your 401k anymore, you don't have access to your savings account, you can't even swipe your fucking debit card anymore to buy your wife some groceries. Like what are you going to do in that situation? You need something that's unconfiscatable that you can use to interact peer to peer with the world around you in an economical and meaning way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we obviously were really impacted by Vern's story and listening to you speak at the Beef Initiative conference. And then when we came across the Amos Miller story last week, we instantly thought of you because we saw the parallels. So we'll link to that in the show notes too. But for anyone that doesn't know, Amos Miller, he's an Amish farmer in Bellingham, Pennsylvania, and he has a loyal customer base. I think he's been selling meat, raw milk, dairy, animal products to the community for like 40 plus years, like super loyal customer base. And they buy from him because they want products as God intended that they're unpasteurized, they're non-denatured. And I think he hasn't necessarily been complying with a lot of the USDA red tape. So they just sent a bunch of federal agents to his house. They raided the property. He's got like $300,000 worth of fines right now. And so as soon as I came across that story, it just reminded me so much of what you were speaking about with Vern.
Yeah, man, it's a battle of attrition, and they just grind you down. And
Mm.
I mean, you guys know this because I forget his name, but I think Josh,
Yeah,
the other
Josh.
guy in the meat mafia, like
Yeah.
with the raw milk, like
Yes.
you can't just go out and buy raw milk. You have to be like part of a club or have a share in a
Yes.
cow, and so that's a great example of like technically it's unpasteurized. You're not following like USDA recommended guidelines, and so that's why you can't sell it. But anyone who doesn't have their head up their ass knows that raw milk is like the best thing you can put in your body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, my wife and I, we've got a cow share with a dairy farmer, a Mennonite dairy farmer down the road from us. And dude, it's like the best thing ever. This goes into the beef initiatives, shaking your rancher's hand, finding local food sources. And I certainly encourage anyone to go out there and explore their options around them.
Yeah. We had Joel Salatin on our podcast, who's a really big regenerative farmer out of Virginia. And he's an advocate and very outspoken about a lot of the regulations around farming. And we asked him, what do you think would happen or what should happen to help drive this new prosperity and movement towards really well-grown food? And he goes, if they just got rid of the regulations, all these farmers could start selling food in a way similar to Amos Miller, directly to their small communities, in a way that, in a volume and quantity that like could increase their scale and improve the quality. So it's like, this is one of the more highly regulated industries, and I find it very interesting that the state is so heavily involved, and that these farmers are constantly trying to figure out ways to like work around, and they're coming up with clubs and little like loopholes in the law. And it's almost like Bitcoin does kind of fit this perfect little gap for them, where, hey, you are interacting peer to peer so frequently, like just having a little bit of exposure to it could help, and in certain situations, and just honestly just like give you some peace of mind too.
Yeah, and here's the funny thing, right? Like the Amish people are so close to like true sovereign individuals, right? And
Yeah.
Ragnar from Guns and Bitcoin gave a great talk a couple years ago, and he was talking about what it takes for a group of people to become sovereign, and it takes muscle, and so that comes in the form of like firepower. So that's the 3D printed guns that he's talking about.
Mhm.
It takes membership, so you need the community around you, and it takes money. You have to have the money to do it. And so like the Amish people, they've got the muscle. Like if you've ever watched a video of the Amish building a barn, dude,
Oh, yeah.
like those people know how to go out there and get some shit done.
Mhm.
And I'm sure they can like take care of themselves however they need to. And they've got the membership, but they don't have the money. So here's the really funny part about all this. Like, how do you get the Amish to accept Bitcoin? Right? This is one of those like Rubik's cubes challenges that like I don't know how anyone is going to solve it, but dude, the Amish are just like so primed for Bitcoin. I can just see it like fitting into their community so well. It's just they don't use technology, and so it's like you've got this barrier there that, man, could just really set these people free.
It makes you wonder, like, if there's a way that you can get, one or two or a small coalition of them in the beginning, and they can almost like preach on behalf of the community just because they have that familiarity with the rest of the Amish culture. Like, could that almost serve as like the beachhead opportunity to like infiltrate Bitcoin into the community? I don't
It
know.
would break like the core principle of like, no tech, but
Yeah.
it's like
Right.
it's
But
so perfect
principle
for them.
wise, yeah.
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 Econo, you strike us as someone, outside of just owning Bitcoin, it seems like you and your family have been very intentional about doing things to become more sovereign. So just curious, would you be able to talk through some of the things that you and your family have done to become more sovereign, just for anyone that's listening to this that wants to be more intentional themselves?
Yeah, hell yeah. I mean, dude, first and foremost, like, so I mentioned we were living outside the Denver metro area.
Mhm.
So when we moved back from Cheyenne, we moved back to Denver, and we were living outside of Denver. And this is going on like through the COVID pandemic. And we absolutely refused to let anyone put a mask on our child.
Mhm.
And so when we were taking our kids to school, dude, every time it started turning into this thing where we were arguing with the teachers in the school about these fucking masks. And we're like, no, you're not putting masks on our kids. And lo and behold, what's that lady's name from CNN who just did a total 180 and is like, oh, we're not going to put masks on our kids because it was causing like speech development issues with my child. And it's like, you're the one who was saying I shouldn't be allowed to leave my house
Yep.
because I wasn't going to put a fucking mask on my kid. Like, fuck you. Sorry. But dude, like,
So on point though.
yeah, like, so when this COVID shit started happening, my wife and I were like, no way, no masks on our kids. So we're like, we're not going to tolerate that. And then I was working in the railroad industry. And so by default, I'm technically a federal contractor because it's railroad related. And what did Biden do? He came out in September of 2021 and said, all federal railroad contractor, or sorry, not railroad, but all federal contractors have to be fully vaccinated. So he came out and said that. And then the Union Pacific sends a letter to my company and they're like, well, these are the regulations. And since you're a subcontractor, technically you have to comply with them too. And I'm just like, I'm very vocal about how I would take a bullet in the head before I would take a fucking vaccine. And my employer didn't like that very much. So I ended up getting fired from my job after 10 years. So I get fired and we're arguing with our kids' teachers every day. And I almost get kicked out of my son's kindergarten graduation because I wouldn't even let him take my temperature at the door. Like, dude, I have never even taken a PCR test or like any sort of COVID test. Like no one's coming near me with any of that shit. Right. So my wife and I are just totally fed up at this point outside of the metro area. And we're like, fuck it. We're going to do what we want to do. And what we want to do is have a little homestead and just have our independence and like be able to provide for ourselves and go somewhere where people are going to respect our decisions, our personal decisions about how we want to live. And so we sold our house outside of Denver and we moved out to the country. And now we live in a little tiny community in the middle of nowhere. We've got we found our dream home. And we've got just enough land to make a really nice garden. And we've got like 30 chickens now. And we're getting a little pasture ready to start raising our own goats. And we found a dairy farmer down the road from us that'll share his raw milk with us. And then we found the beef initiative. So we've been getting all our beef from K&C cattle down there in Texas. The next day air the beef up to us. And yeah, man, we broke out. I feel like we escaped prison, and it's just like, we're so much happier down here. There's no mask mandates down here. There's no like people just respect you and what you want to do. And they don't judge you and they don't try and control you and they don't try and make you do things you don't want to do. And everyone is armed. So like you see a lot of people like doing open carry down here. And it's like, a lot of people are very respectful because you don't misbehave when there's like a gun sitting at the table next to you at the restaurant, so it's just great, man. It's a different way of life. And so, yeah, I guess, to answer your question, we try to become sovereign individuals by putting ourselves in a position where we could spread our wings out a little bit and do what we want to do without being fucked with. And that's what we've built, and that's the way we want to raise our children. We don't want our children like just crumbling under the pressure of authority and just doing what they're told without being asked. It's not the kind of kids I want to raise. It's not the future I want to live in. Right. So I'm not going to raise my kids like that. I want people thinking and being strong and being independent and standing up for what they believe in. I want people out there fighting for their rights and their freedoms and their values. And so that's what my wife and I tried to do. Like we didn't like the way we were being treated. And so we did something about it. Got up and left and went to another place where now we can do what we want to do without having that friction and that fight against us.
Well, first off, I'm sorry to hear all that happened, but I also am kind of curious, like, are you appreciative of that sort of friction that you ran into to kind of make you take that hard line stance and make the break to be like, hey, I'm just going to be more sovereign in like just a more objective way?
There is a silver lining in all of that, right? And so sorry, just so you know, I'm getting a warning that my internet connection is unstable.
Oh, okay.
So just if I cut out, just raise your hand or something. So I know
still sound clear on our end. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, the silver lining in it all is like, was I happy at my job? No, I wasn't fulfilling my potential. I was happy that I could provide a good life for my wife and kids. But once that pandemic started and the life that we were all being subjected to wasn't that great anymore, it really kind of took the the purpose out of me going to work. Like, what, what's the point in doing that anymore? So like I started becoming really unhappy at work because of what was going on. And yeah, I think it's because we weren't happy and we weren't willing to settle, that we were motivated to take action and do something different. And would we have just tolerated it and just kept grinding if none of that happened? Very likely. Yeah. I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today from inside my dream home.
Yeah.
And so for that, I'm thankful. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. How do you and Coco think about raising your kids after seeing all the craziness that happened in the school system? Are you going to homeschool your kids?
Mhm.
Is that the path moving
Yep,
forward?
we are. Yep. Yeah, we're doing homeschool. Yeah.
Yeah. So is there someone that you're like learning the curriculum from, or I'm just curious how you go about doing that?
So when you get into it, there's these programs that you can sign up for through your county, and they've got like homeschooling programs. And so they make it really easy to, like, because the state has requirements. You can't just pull a kid out of public school and then like, see you later. Like the
Right.
state's going to come knocking and they're going to have some questions about that child's well-being.
Right.
So you have to do these, like, you have to keep track of their attendance and like document that you're doing these lessons with them, and you still have to like do these lessons with them. So there's like these programs that you get in, and you get the lessons that you need. So a lot of it is that, and that takes a couple hours a day, and you've just got like a year to complete X number of assignments, and you do that when it's convenient for you. So for us, it's like we do like an hour in the morning and then we do an hour in the afternoon. But then everything else that we're teaching them is like the hands-on stuff about getting our little homestead going here. And
Right.
so like our son is really good with the chickens, and our daughter loves helping mommy out there in the garden, and my son loves helping me build stuff in the Bitcoin mine out in the shipping container. And just like, so you've just got these little mini me versions of you that you're trying to pass on some common sense and some skills to. So a lot of it is just like them tagging along with us, learning what we're doing. And what we're doing is building the life around us to survive, and so they're learning those skills as they go along. And
Well,
it's especially good having animals around the house, like chickens and dogs and guinea pigs, because then the children are exposed to that life and death. And
Mhm.
that's really important to learn about at a young age, because we've got a little pet cemetery back there that's filling up pretty quickly because accidents happen on the farm, and stuff goes on. But that's, those are those kinds of like life lessons that our kids are getting at a young age, because they're not in like a prison style elementary school sitting there all day every day. They're out in our yard learning with us. So
do you find yourself learning on the fly too, and kind of just being able to teach as you're learning on the homestead as well?
yeah, for me, a lot of what I'm learning is like how to communicate better, and like how to control my emotions, and how to be a good role model. Because like when you're with your children 24 hours a day, all day, and they're not like picking up social cues from their buddies at school all day, like they're picking up all your little idiosyncrasies. And so
Right.
like I have a propensity to cuss a lot, so I'm trying not to do that. And I have a pretty short temper if things aren't working out the way I want them to work out, so I'm trying to like learn how to control that so I can display to my children what a calm, rational adult looks like, so they can try to become that, instead of becoming this person who's not in control of their emotions, who's suffering from anxiety and running around like a chicken with their head cut off. I don't want to be that guy. So I'm trying to like learn how to deal with challenges and deal with frustrations in a way that is healthy for my children. And so that's really what I've been learning.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty handy do-it-yourselfer all around. Like, I love fixing stuff. So as far as like just getting like things fixed up and working around the house, like I haven't had any hesitation about that.
Mm.
It's more of just like how to be a good role model, and the lessons my children are teaching me when I hear them say the F word or something like that, then I know I got to correct myself.
Yeah, well, the cool thing about your kids too is there were a couple of people that commented on this to us how your and Coco's kids were there, and there were a couple other speakers that had their kids there, and you and Coco were like leading panels and sessions, and like your kids were like by themselves playing for a large portion of the event, and they were just like chilling, doing their thing, like super well behaved, and like multiple people commented on it because it's almost like it's very rare to see kids that are like that have that independence at such a young age. So I know it's anecdotal, but clearly what you both are doing is working because we saw that firsthand at the conference.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. We try to correct bad behaviors in good ways,
Hmm.
and we try and keep them busy, and we
Yeah.
don't, we used to like let them watch like an iPad and let them watch videos and stuff. And like I just I always had a problem with that ever since they were little kids. And eventually it just got to the point where I'm like, no, I'm putting my foot down. We're taking these devices away. They don't need this garbage, because I could see how their ability to communicate with each other like just kept deteriorating. And
Yeah.
it just got to the point where like, our daughter wouldn't use words anymore. She would just scream at her brother when he was doing something she didn't like. And it's like, you got to stop screaming. You got to use your words. Like, nobody knows what you're thinking. Like, you got to say it. And so like just trying to get them to not be wrapped up in that device, and to just be in their own head and to be in their own body, and to understand what it means to be in control of their bodies and their voices and their minds, and how to communicate with other people in healthy ways. And so that's just getting rid of devices will have such a huge impact on your kids. If anyone out there is struggling with their kids, like being distracted, not paying attention to them, not listening to them, forgetting things that you tell them, not being able to communicate effectively, not knowing what emotions feel like, and like not knowing that this is anger or not knowing that this is sadness. Like, if your kids got any of that going on, get rid of your devices, throw your television out the window, take the iPads away, take the cell phones away, put them in a dresser drawer for a couple of weeks, and just watch what your kids do. There's this fear parents have that if they take the device away, then they're gonna.
Like you cut out a little bit. Oh, you cut out and then you just came back, I think. It's
Okay.
only like 5 seconds, but yeah, I think you said it's a fear of the device and then you cut out.
Yeah, so parents have this fear that if they take the devices away, they're going to be stuck with this little human being that's just going to be bouncing off the walls and causing all this chaos.
Hmm.
You'd be surprised how fast your kids will find something to entertain themselves with that is not an electronic device, and they do very well with it. So if anyone's going through that, because I know I've been there, dude, take the devices away from your kids. It's really the best thing you can do.
Mm.
I love it.
It's such sound advice. I mean,
Totally.
neither of us have kids, but we see it. I mean, anyone who walks through an airport or a public space, you see the kids who are just glued to the screen, and I can only imagine what that does to cut exactly what you're saying, just like emotional like abilities to express themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eh,
You don't have to think about what you're feeling and what you're doing when you can focus on that device. And dude, that'll fuck up somebody. Fuck 'em
100%.
up.
Echo, something that you said that really struck me is you were speaking about like the state's propensity to commit violence against the individual. And we're just curious, from your perspective, what do you think the actual role of the state should be?
God, that's a good question. I mean, my knee jerk reaction is to say I don't think there is any role of the
Mhm.
state to play, at some level. Um, I mean, I guess you could call that like extreme libertarianism, right? But um, dude, I don't know, man. I know what the state's role shouldn't be,
Yeah.
Okay. And it shouldn't be to be able to cut us off from basic financial services that the way they can. It shouldn't be that they can arm 87,000 IRS agents because there's a $2.7 trillion deficit. You know, like that's what's happening here is like you've got all these politicians that have engaged in these reckless monetary policies that you don't get to vote on.
Mm-hmm.
And these reckless monetary policies have resulted in like this much money coming in and like this much money coming out. And there's this $2.7 trillion deficit. And so how do they fill that gap? Well, they go and hire 87,000 IRS agents. They give them a badge, they deputize them, they give them a gun, and then they send them out there to go harass the individuals and shake people down for money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they try to fill those gaps. That's all your taxes are. Your taxes don't get taken from you and then directly given to somebody to go manage some social program. What happens is your taxes get taken from you and then they get thrown in a fucking furnace and deleted. And then the government just prints money to go pay for what they want to do. And the way they curb inflation is by trying to take money out of the supply. And so how do you take money out of the supply? You go arm a bunch of IRS agents and tell them to go harass the American citizens. So that's not what the fucking state's purpose is for sure. Fuck that. Income tax, don't even get me started on that. That's not, the federal income tax is the biggest fucking scam. That is not the state's purpose. All right. Taxation is theft. So I don't, if the state has a purpose, I don't think it's taxation for sure. And I don't think they have any right to come after your personal property. You know, military, yeah, maybe like, I don't know what the fuck we're paying for having our men and women in other countries all around the world. Like, as far as I'm concerned, all they're doing is like going over there and extracting the resources of these other nations through the violence of the American military.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing that so like these mega corporations can profit off of those resources. Like, I don't need the military out in Afghanistan and Iraq to go secure oil. Like, dude, bring our military home. Like, if you want to put the military on our borders to like protect our borders from invasion, that's one thing. But I don't see any reason we need to go around the world policing it. So I don't think the state has any business doing that or any purpose doing that, you know? Like, I think well-armed militias are one thing. I think having a well-armed community and people that have got each other's backs is great. Like, having some military personnel at the border to prevent invasions, like, yeah, that's one thing. But dude, like going around the world, like doing what they're doing with the military these days, like, no, dude, I think Biden just spun up like another $300 billion to send to Ukraine. Like, no, dude, that's not what the state's purpose is.
Yeah.
That's not helping the American people. So yeah, dude, I don't know what the state's purpose is, but I've got some ideas about what it isn't.
Well, I think just even being able to start with a list of what the state shouldn't be doing and the things that we just accept as a society, it's a super helpful point to start for a lot of people, because most people don't even ask themselves that question. They just accept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, dude, is there any reason I really need to like register my car to drive my own car? Like, do I need a license? Do I need some document issued that says this is my social security number and this is my name at birth? Like, what, like, I'm only who I am because the state tells me I'm that person.
Yeah.
And like, dude, what are we doing here? You know, I don't know, man. I really struggle finding purpose in the state.
Yeah. Well, in some of the, I mean, we're a nutrition podcast, but we try to take it a level deeper, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's funny talking to like Bitcoiners and ranchers, and there's a thread that we're trying to weave here, which is like these are all related. And like some of the things that have happened at the state level on nutritional guidelines is another just insane overreach of like one, like just misguided information that was you know, whether or not it was nefarious or not, like it steered our entire health of our nation in the wrong direction, and put power in these multinational companies' hands who are paying for all these studies, and they're benefiting from every study that's saying sugar is good for you, or a calorie is a calorie, go get more exercise. Like Coca-Cola and all these big companies are benefiting from this stuff, and we're kind of all subject to it. And I think it's just incredibly important to be having these conversations kind of across different avenues, whether you're talking about better money, better food, getting connected with your rancher. Like I think all these conversations are important.
Yeah, dude, tell any of your viewers to pull up a chart of obesity rates in the United States or of heart disease, and like
70%.
It's crazy.
and then like look at like what we've got with like Monsanto and then putting Roundup in all of our food, and like the desertification of all of the pasture lands in this country. Like that's what the state regulation is getting you. So
Yeah.
I know the state shouldn't have their fucking hands in that shit. Like
Yep.
that is clearly not working. And like, and if you've, in case you've had your head under a rock, state regulation and FDA approval on like vaccines and the pharmaceutical industry clearly is not working, in case you didn't notice. So they shouldn't have their hands in that. And it just like,
Yeah.
dude, to your point, the state getting involved with that stuff has just ruined it. The regulations ruin it.
Yeah. Echo, we'll have to send you the piece that we wrote last week on our Substack on the Nutri-Score, which is a nutritional grading system that's backed by I think it's the World Health Organization. And right, these organizations know how to specifically rig these different matrix to basically engineer a desired outcome. So they have it. So I think is it Coca-Cola that's ranked healthier than sardines on the Nutri-Score?
It was Coca-Cola over sardines, which is,
That's
it's basically a
insane.
criminal thing to say. Like the sardines are just like fatty, and they figured out some way with their model, their algorithm, their model, to make the output say that sardines are worse than Coke, or Coke is better than sardines.
Dude, it's dangerous. You got these people out there thinking that shit is true. And just like the guy that responded to your Twitter thread, you showed like a before and after picture of starting the carnivore diet and like conquering that disease. And that dude's like telling you that, oh, like your carnivore diet's going to ruin your immune system or whatever. And it's just like,
Wake up.
You fucking retarded, man? Like,
dude, it's insane. And to take it even a step further, I used to be in this Facebook group for people that had ulcerative colitis. And so when I wrote that thread and it got popular, I sent it in the group, in the chat, so people could maybe have some hope and say, hey, you could experiment with your diet and maybe you could get off these drugs that are costing you $50,000 per infusion, and they're terrible for your long-term health. And there were a bunch of people that like pushed back and were giving me really negative feedback. And we had a doctor on, an endocrinologist, who's like super based. He's carnivore. And he's like, I would literally bet money that they're basically bots that were paid off by the pharmaceutical companies that were that were paid to be negative against your post, because it goes against the whole pharmaceutical industrial complex.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. It's insane what they'll do and the measures they'll go to suppress these things that actually work, like raw milk and omega-3 fatty acids.
Yep.
And good grass-fed, grass-finished food. And dude, the same thing like my wife was talking about at the Beef Initiative on her panel with like home birthing and this whole like movement against midwives and demonizing midwives and making hospitals sound like they were like really clean and friendly. And we've got young, pretty nurses that'll take care of you, not these ugly, decrepit midwives that are gonna like creep around you like a goblin. And so they just like they demonize the stuff that works so that they can propagate the products that cause you problems that they conveniently own the solutions for as well. Or not even the solutions, but just like the band-aid to treat like the symptoms.
Right? Yeah. I feel like a lot of this conversation goes back to what you said before about just the willingness to take sovereignty over your own life. And like we're just very grateful that people like you in this world exist that are able to teach people about Bitcoin. You've done so much good writing on your website. Like you said, you're writing through practical experiences and how you really use Bitcoin as a tool to enable like a better quality of life for your family to solve some of these problems. So we'll link to all that in the show notes. We'll link to the great work that you published on Vern there too. And we're obviously just grateful to now be friends with you and get to reconnect with you at the Georgia conference. And just thank you so much for coming on, man.
Hell yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to seeing you guys in Georgia.
Econo, it's going to be fun. Thanks for the combo, man. This was great.
Yeah, have fun at the beefsteak tonight.
We will.
It's going to be great.
We'll crush a ribeye for you in honor of you not being there.
Please do. I got FOMO. I'm missing out.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Take care.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.